Oh, just get to know their neighborhood, get to know their neighbors. I think it's perfect. It's a fun way to do it.
There you go. And there's a lot of issues with gentrification, people are concerned about, and crime and whatnot. And if you know your neighbors, you know, that's a great way to deal with those things rather than just kind of seclude yourself inside. So.
We really want to get to know people in the community, actually have a sense of each other. We're not all strangers, and we can maybe work towards some common goals.
We take computers, electronics, home electronics, stuff like that, small appliances. I mean, it's just so simple to recycle. I mean, there's so many places around town that'll take a lot of this stuff at no charge. I mean, there's no reason not to recycle.
37th and L, so.
Brings people together, community, and you know where you're at, you know your resources. Like right around the corner, I didn't know that this was going to be here, so it was awesome to be able to see this in action.
Down. Awesome.
When they recycle a pop bottle, they can make carpeting from it. And this sweatshirt has got recycled, police sweatshirts made out of recycled pop bottles.
We thought we'd bring our kids over. Some of the programs we have involve recycling, stuff like that. So we thought it'd be a good idea for them to see it firsthand.
Really kind of about sustainability, but thinking about how can we bring people together to work on neighborhood building and community building as an important component of sustainability.
Neighbor-to-neighbor connections are vital to neighborhood stability and prosperity.
It's good to get to know people, make connections, learn about things, let everyone know that this is a good community. You know, we love it here.
It was very nice to meet you, Alma. Have a good day.
Here we go. And that's how printing works. So yeah, and we put the message, neighbors have more power together, because this is an event that's focused on people getting together and working together to build relationships and build power for residents and neighborhoods. So.
Thank you so much for taking some time to watch our quick video about the Neighborhood Powered Network event that we had put on. Today we're going to be talking with a few of the contributors and collaborators in that project. And today we have Amanda Huckins, she is a resident. We have Pat Anderson Cifuentes, and I'm Kurt Elder. I'm a resident, and I also work for the City of Lincoln in the Urban Development Department. The event was diverse, and it took some time to plan out. But I want to turn over to Pat right quick and tell us a little bit about the history of how we got here. So what do you think, Pat?
Okay. I'm a community engagement person with NeighborWorks Lincoln, and the event came about because NeighborWorks Lincoln is affiliated with NeighborWorks America, and there's a national training for residents, as you both know because you were there, that everyone participated in. A result of this training is that the residents that participate get to do a project, and this was a project that they chose to do. So,
so when we were in Louisville, we came up with the idea that we would do a pop-up event, but instead, through that process, through meeting and talking and having that conversation, we branded ourselves differently, because pop-up is, well, what's a pop-up event? It's like saying, what's pop or soda, which is kind of confusing. So we rebranded ourselves as a neighborhood-powered network, and we had a tagline, and we developed all that. But as part of that process, we spent how many months did we spend, getting this project together? Did we spend 3 months, 4 months bringing this project together?
Well, the training was at the end of October,
right.
And I think we didn't really get into the planning of it until January. But from January through the month of May, right. We met monthly, and then as we got closer, the the last month we met weekly.
Right.
So it did take quite a bit of planning, and that would not be a traditional pop-up, because a pop-up would be, I'm going to do something and I'm going to do it now.
Right, because
But-
I have an idea and I want to share it with someone, right, Amanda?
And I wanted to back up for a second that,
Please.
that the focus also was on, for this group, was on sustainability. So that includes, because we had a lot of different groups that represented different environmental groups in town, a lot of people that that represented environmental groups in town. And so we wanted to focus on sustainability, and because we know that it's going to take a lot of reminders and education for people, for Lincolnites to catch on to recycling and learning how to live more sustainably. So we wanted to do, that was the idea of the pop-up, was to reinforce that. And part of sustainability, now I should turn this over to Amanda, can't be done without the people.
Right. And so some of the lessons that we learned through this process would not only be applicable to future Lincoln projects, but also other projects in other communities, right? So some of those lessons that we learned, some of the things that had we done it this time that way, if we wanted to do it again, what are some of those lessons that we gleaned from this? What were some of the ones you pulled out, Amanda?
So Pat mentioned the fact that another kind of sustainability is social sustainability, and I think that came up in early meetings that we wanted to also address that. So part of getting a handle on what people in the neighborhood think or where they were education-wise on sustainability was to do a survey in a passport that we developed. So this has a lot of information in it, and kind of along the same lines of taking a long time to plan something and it kind of becoming a bigger event. The passport probably was bigger than it needed to be. We realized that there was maybe a few too many questions. It was really good data that we would get if people filled it out, but we hadn't done an event like this before. So I think people weren't quite expecting to have to fill out a survey. So
what are some of those direct things that you learned about your survey? And then we're going to come back about more logistic things second. But what were some of those things that were key takeaways from this survey? Because it's 8 or 9, 12 pages. It's kind of big.
It's a pretty big passport, and it's got a lot of information in it for people to take home afterwards. But the survey section, we decided it'd probably be better to limit to about 5 questions so that people wouldn't have the burden of filling out this giant thing at an event that's supposed to be pretty fun. And also making a smaller passport for kids to maybe earn a prize. We were giving away community crops bags for people who filled out the passport and went to more of the most of the booths. And we decided it'd probably be easier to give kids a little passport that was much more focused on just going around and experiencing the booths, and to give adults a bigger passport that had more of the information about planning events later.
I think in some of our prior conversations, you had also said that whereas with this program and with this current process, what was happening is that kids and people would come up to the actual booth and they'd be like, sign my thing, and they'd run off.
Yeah.
And so it'd be more of a smaller passport, and they would have to do something engaging, then you could sign.
Exactly.
And so it wasn't just a here and there, gone and away.
That's another thing we learned about communication with the booth representatives and volunteers, is that if everyone was a little better trained on how we wanted, as organizers, how we wanted to use the passport, that people would at the booths be able to hand them out and explain what was going on with it, and then also know exactly what their responsibilities were with the passport or with conveying information. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
For example, instead of kids coming and saying, please sign because their eye is on the prize, then they would have to, the person at the booth would require them to participate and engage, because all of the activities were very engaging.
Sure.
There were hands-on recycling and community crops.
And before we go on to your logistics side of this, I think we had also discussed the idea that instead of having one current point, one beginning point, that all booths would be able to hand out passports and be engaged that way. So there was more of a flow. And so let's just kind of pivot a little bit and go to some of those logistics things that we learned. There was about 8 or 9 of those, but we had talked about grouping those somewhat together. One of them was, which one wants to start first?
We had
a lot of space.
We had a half a city block available to us, and we used the whole thing. And it was a very hot day, and for people to walk back and forth, it was too much.
So
it was pretty spread out as it turned out.
So we probably needed more
could have
maps
condensed.
also. That we could have condensed the space and also had a little bit better wayfinding system so that people would be able to be in any corner of the event and see where, you know, different booths were located if they were interested in certain things.
So I know that some of the points that we had talked about was also having booth numbers, and then, you know, booth numbers meaning that it's the vendors that were coming, it's the nonprofits that were coming. They would know where they had to go, so they would spend less time finding those of us that were putting an event together.
Yeah, exactly.
So 2 points from that then would be
And prior training.
and prior training. So exactly. So
Would have helped.
before the day of that event, you would want to have maybe a few days prior, bringing everyone together so you know who forgot about the actual event, so you can remind them to come to your event, so you don't have gaps and holes within the tables that you've set up, and you don't have gaps and holes within the media that you've put out. And then going back to that first part, which was have these table numbers out, so as we're all rushing to put this thing together, that comes down to us just to being on time and being engaged, and, you know, making sure that, you know, we have our defined pieces. And
of course, a lot of these
Yeah.
things would not be a problem if it were a smaller event too.
Right.
It just
Smaller event,
wouldn't
smaller
come up.
space.
Yeah.
And so we
And you could focus on
Yes.
while this passport that we used is very long. The nice thing about it is it can be picked up and you can take one piece of it and duplicate it, and those will be available if people want to pick them up at NeighborWorks Lincoln. And I think people can look at our sponsors, look at our partners, and get a pretty good idea how we went about it, and there's a lot of information in there that, so it's pretty easy to duplicate, I think. And we'll also have contacts.
Sure. So let's just kind of just wrap this up. We had fun doing it. It was a large event, but the main takeaways were smaller event, smaller passport, and if you want to have a more concise topic, you want to have a smaller planning time frame. I think that a pop-up event that we had initially planned on doing could have been done if we only gave ourselves 2 to 3 weeks just to get something done, to have a smaller, more, you know, direct conversation, just like we're having now. But if you give us 4 months and if you give ambition that much time, well, then the workload is going to increase at that same rate.
And people might wonder, you know, if I want to do this, who's going to attend? We had, what was that, 150 plus over 20, 30 volunteers, and at least 150. So we had a pretty good attendance, we thought, for it was a really hot day and for it being late in the afternoon. But if people want to do a small piece of this, a lot of people who attended said, this is really fun. I'd like to do this. I'd like this to happen in my neighborhood, and it can.
Yeah, and it certainly can. So how about we just wrap this up right quick and say that should people want to learn more about this passport that we've created, about the process that we went through, you are more than welcome to contact Pat over at NeighborWorks. That's at 477-7181. Or if you want to learn more about some of the conversations that we had with local residents, local businesses at a local neighborhood StoryCorps, you can go to kzum.org/Our Street, OURSTREET, and you'll find some podcasts there. So
there's also a Facebook group.
And there's a Facebook group
for Neighbor Powered Networks. So look that up and join it if you want to communicate.
Right. The Facebook group for Neighbor Powered Networks. Find us on Facebook. We'd love to have your interaction and support there as well. So I'm Kurt Elder, Amanda Hutkins, and Pat Anderson Cifuentes. Thank you.